The war in Ukraine has become the largest and most brutal conflict since World War II. The number of civilian and child casualties has reached tens of thousands. Today, I will try to briefly tell you about the main events in Ukraine in 2022. The Russian invasion of Ukraine began around 3:40 a.m. when the first column of Russian tanks entered the territory of the Luhansk region. The first signals of direct conflict were also received from webcams at Crimean checkpoints. Around 4 a.m., guards and civilians at the Kalinchak checkpoint noticed people running. Shortly after, the checkpoint lost power and the camera switched to infrared mode. After 4 a.m., 4 people in camouflage were spotted. The camera stopped working shortly after. At the Chang'er checkpoint, the power also went out, and the camera stopped working. Around 4:50 a.m., a previously recorded speech by Russian President Vladimir Putin was broadcasted, in which he ordered a special military operation to be carried out in eastern Ukraine.
Мною принято решение о проведении специальной военной операции. Ее цель – защита людей, которые на протяжении 8 лет подвергаются издевательствам, геноциду со стороны киевского режима.
Around 5 a.m., dozens of cities throughout the country, including the capital city of Kyiv, were hit by missile strikes. Shortly after, the Ukrainian Border Service announced that their border posts with Russia and Belarus had been shelled. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky declared a state of war. The war had begun. Russian troops surrounded the city of Konotop and laid siege to it. Despite Russian attempts to capture Konotop, the city held its ground and Russian forces were repelled. Russian equipment was seen burning on the morning of February 25. However, Ukrainian military later reported that they lost control of Konotop later that same day. In the south, Russian forces advanced unimpeded through Perekop and Chang'er and captured Novokakhovka, including the Kakhovka hydroelectric power station, during the day, but could not hold on to it, so the power plant changed hands multiple times over the next 3 days, and approached Kherson. Another column approached Melitopol. Around 4 p.m., Russian helicopter troops captured Antonov Airport, but later the Ukrainian counterattack successfully repelled the airport and destroyed the Russian landing force. An hour later, Russian forces captured the Chernobyl nuclear power plant and the abandoned city of Pripyat. In his second address on the war, U.S. President Joe Biden announced a complete freeze on the assets of several Russian banks in the U.S. However, he did not impose sanctions against Putin himself and did not call for Russia to be disconnected from the global banking exchange SWIFT. In the first 5 days of the offensive, the enemy captured large territories, from Kherson to Mariupol and Vasilyevka in the Azov Sea region, the northern districts of Kyiv, Luhansk, Kharkiv, Chernihiv, almost the entire Sumy region, and attacked and shelled Kyiv, Kharkiv, Chernihiv, Sumy, which were under threat of encirclement. Overall, the enemy reduced the pace of the offensive, but still continued to advance in some directions. The aggressors experienced difficulties with fuel and ammunition. The occupiers were unable to capture Chernihiv and Kharkiv, so they carried out missile strikes on residential areas in these cities. Russian troops were besieging the cities of Sumy, Lebedin, and Okturka, while the enemy was regrouping to continue the offensive towards Kyiv. In the Donetsk region, enemy forces, supported by artillery, unsuccessfully attempted to capture Mariupol, which was already surrounded. On the Tavria direction, the enemy advanced to the line in the areas of the populated places of Skadovsk, Ola Pristan, Kherson, and Novokakhovka. They regrouped and continued the offensive towards Mykolaiv and Voznesensk. In March, the occupiers approached the outskirts of Zaporizhia, tried to cross the southern Bug near Voznesensk in the direction of Odessa, continued to storm the northern suburbs of Kiev and Kharkiv, and also seized northern Luhansk Oblast and eastern Kharkiv Oblast. However, soon the occupiers had problems with supply and army losses, so at the end of March, the aggressors withdrew from the northern regions of Ukraine, transferring their troops to the Donbass in the hope of surrounding the units of the armed forces of Ukraine there. At the same time, the armed forces of Ukraine slightly pushed back the enemy in the north of the right bank Kherson Oblast and near Kharkiv. The prolonged defense of the besieged Mariupol continued. Battles began on the approaches to Rubizn and Severodonetsk. On March 16th, the Russians dropped a powerful bomb on the Mariupol drama theater, where several hundred civilians were hiding. Unfortunately, all of them died. In April, Izium was captured, and the aggressors made persistent attempts to advance further towards Sloviansk and Barvinkov, which created a threat of encirclement of the Ukrainian armed forces in the Donbass. Kremenna was lost in Luhansk Oblast. Fierce battles in the Donbass. Defenders of Mariupol find themselves surrounded at the Azovstal plant. On April 13th, as a result of being hit by 2 Neptune missiles near Snake Island in the evening, a fire broke out, and the next day, while being towed, the flagship of the Russian Black Sea Fleet, the cruiser Moscow, sank. In May, the armed forces of Ukraine left Popasna, Rubizn, Lyman, and Svitlodarsk, and battles began in Severodonetsk. The Ukrainian armed forces liberated a number of settlements north of Kharkiv. Russian attacks continued on the Izium bridgehead. The defenders of Azovstal surrendered. In June, after street fighting, the Ukrainian armed forces retreated from Severodonetsk and from the Hersk-Zolot district in Luhansk region. On June 30th, under artillery fire, the occupiers left the island of Zminy. Significant changes on the front line did not occur in August. The main battles took place on the eastern approaches to Severodonetsk Solidar Bakhmut, to the northeast of Avdiivka, in the areas of Mariinka and Pizki, to the northwest of Sloviansk, on the border of the region, and in the area between Kherson and Mykolaiv. Overall, this was the first month of a massive invasion in which the aggressors failed to capture any cities or large settlements. At the end of the month, information began to emerge about the intensification of the Ukrainian armed forces in the Kherson region. There was a prolonged transfer of occupation forces to the right bank of Kherson and an escalation of the situation around the captured Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, under the cover of which the occupiers created their military base. Turning point in the war, the beginning of liberation of the occupied Ukrainian territory. In September, the Russian aggressors once again failed to achieve any significant success on the front lines. Instead, the Ukrainian armed forces conducted an effective counteroffensive operation in the Kharkiv region and liberated almost the entire occupied part of the region, with the cities of Balaklia, Izium, Kupiansk, a total of 300 settlements in Kharkiv region, where 150,000 people live. The gradual advance of the Ukrainian armed forces towards the cities of Lyman and Lysychansk on the eastern bank of the Oskil River continued. The main events of October were the explosion on the Kerch Bridge, which, in addition to logistical problems, dealt a blow to Putin's and the Russian government's image overall. This was another huge victory. The main event of November was the liberation of Kherson and the right bank-occupied districts of Kherson region. On November 9th, there were reports of the liberation of villages in Kherson region, and on the same day, the Ministry of War of the Russian Federation announced the planned withdrawal of occupation troops from the right bank of the Dnipro River to the left. On November 10th, there was news of the liberation of Snaya Rivka in Mykolaiv region, and on November 11th, a number of villages in Kherson region were liberated. Ukrainian troops advanced to the outskirts of Kherson, and on the same day, the Ministry of War of the Russian Federation reported that its troops and equipment had been withdrawn to the left bank of the Dnipro River as planned, with significant losses suffered. This was another huge victory over the monster. The main battles in December were concentrated in Bakhmut. Its eastern outskirts suffered the most from active combat operations. The Ukrainian Air Force carried out 2 attacks on the airfield in the Russian city of Engels on December 5th and 26th. The attacks were carried out by drones and disrupted the enemy's use of strategic bombers against Ukraine. At least 2 Tu-95 aircraft, which Russia had used to strike Ukraine, were damaged. On December 26th, a repeat attack was carried out on the Engels airbase, and an attack was carried out on the Dyagilevo airfield in Ryazan, where another aircraft was damaged. These were the main events that took place in Ukraine in 2022. Of course, I haven't told you everything, as it wouldn't fit in one video. Please subscribe to the channel, help Ukraine in any way you can, and support the channel. All links are in the video description.